What is going on, Sports Wars? We're here. We're live for another edition of Monday Evening Quarterback. And I think it's a good week for Robert Barnes to return to Sports Wars because not only did we have some crazy results in the NFL, but we also have some implications in college football that are really going to affect the college football playoff coming up on Rivalry weekend. So Robert, who is one of the busiest men on earth, especially the past 3 weeks during all this Kyle Rittenhouse stuff, how are you doing, my friend?
Good.
All right. We're glad to have you back here. And we're just going to hop right in to the NFL because we had a couple big upsets. And, when it comes to the AFC, it definitely seems like it's anybody's ball game at this point. You got a lot of people in the AFC West that are vying for, potentially getting in there, potentially be an AFC championship contender. You got the Tennessee Titans. You got the Buffalo Bills. And Tennessee Titans and Buffalo Bills both lost in big ways in embarrassing fashion this weekend. And let's start with the Buffalo Bills. A lot of people's pick to go to the Super Bowl from the AFC. Josh Allen coming off an incredible season where he really took a step forward. People expected big things from this team, especially with, once again, Tom Brady gone from that division. But they got absolutely hammered by the Indianapolis Colts. Jonathan Taylor puts up 5 touchdowns, and they just could not stop that Colts offense, nor could they score on the defense.
Yeah, I think it's, my question with the Bills was always how good is Josh Allen in reality? And he shows little. He has these occasional just totally drops off. Mostly very good, mostly exceptional, but, like the Jaguars game, like this game, like the Steelers early in the season. You look at who the Bills have lost to at some of the bottom, it's teams sub 500 teams. Lost to the Steelers, lost to the Jaguars, and then, of course, now lost at home to the Colts. Now, so I think it just shows that Allen is still has not shown the dominant consistency. He's not like a Tom Brady, where Tom Brady might have an off game, but it's still not, a bad game where you're in single digits late in the fourth quarter like they were against the Jaguars, like they were again last week, this past Sunday against the Colts. So I think it just shows that's the vulnerability still of the Bills. Can Josh Allen maintain the degree of consistency necessary? And then their defense occasionally gets weak against the run, and that showed up again. And so that's the vulnerabilities they have and are still their limitations for AFC title expectations. And then you counterbalance that with, as he's got healthier, Frank Reich has been an offensive genius for a long time.
Yeah.
Ever since, when he was the backup quarterback. Frank Reich has one of those Trivial Pursuit winner answers, because, who's the quarterback who up until Tom Brady in the Super Bowl was the quarterback who had the biggest comeback in college and the biggest comeback in the NFL? It was Frank Reich, the backup quarterback. He had it in Maryland in college, and then he had it again with the Buffalo Bills. But he's been an offensive genius for a while. He might have been more responsible than anybody else for the Eagles' success when he was there as an assistant. And he managed to take some, the post Andrew Luck era. He's managed to keep the Colts competitive no matter who their quarterback has been. And as Carson Wentz has got healthy, it seems like more and more of that offense is working. And Reich finds a way to win games that he's not supposed to win, but they seem to start getting better and better and better. Still have limitations due to talent, but as they get T.Y. Hilton back and others, I think they're going to continue to be a meaningful playoff contender down the stretch of the season, because we're just past the midpoint and they're starting to be on the upswing, while the Bills continue to show their erratic tendencies that will be their biggest hurdle for being a Super Bowl winner going forward.
Yeah, and it really is all about consistency. And what we saw Josh Allen, I think it may have been against the Texans in the playoffs 3 years ago, back when, Deshaun Watson was still actually playing for the Texans, where he had this really bonehead play real late in the game. And you thought maybe this guy isn't going to be the dude. And he comes out and has an incredible year last year. And he's definitely hasn't quite maintained that, but I wouldn't say he's really regressed. Like you said, it's just kind of all about consistency for them at this point. And the Colts, they're 500. I think they're back to 500 now. Yep. And Jonathan Taylor has gone on a tear, and I did not see that coming. I actually specifically stayed away from Jonathan Taylor and any fantasy implications because I just thought that Colts backfield was really, really full. And it started out first couple of games of the season, you weren't sure what you were going to get. But Jonathan Taylor, I think the past 8 games, he's had like over 100 yards from scrimmage and a touchdown in all of them. Something we haven't really seen since LaDainian Tomlinson, if I believe, based on the graphic they threw up there on Sunday. So, the Colts in that division, I don't think Tennessee is going to fall off enough for really them to take it back from them, but definitely could still be a wild card contender. And that's basically the AFC. So many things are up in the air. And speaking of Tennessee Titans, they're another one that had, I would say, I don't know if this is more or less embarrassing loss to the Houston Texans. And we said it when Derrick Henry got hurt. It may only be a matter of time that they can kind of play this game without that dominant run game where they've predicated all of their offense. All of Tennessee's offensive success is derived from Derrick Henry and his dominance. The fact that they're going to run it with 8 men in the box and then get that play action game that opens it up for Ryan Tannehill, who his entire career has been a slightly better than average quarterback, to have all the room in the world to throw to some of these weapons. And now that he's not there, now that you have Adrian Peterson plugged in, it's just not looking the same. And Ryan Tannehill, I think, threw 4 interceptions in this game, and they looked dead against the Houston Texans. Not a game that they really should have struggled with like this, and they end up losing.
Yeah, I had both the Colts and the Texans this week because the spreads were so big at sportspicks.locals.com. And so I wasn't surprised from that sense. Also, the Texans offense is a little more reliable and less turnover prone with Tyrod Taylor back at quarterback, who's missed most of the season. But there's no question. The key to that game was that the Texans defense could focus on the pass because Derrick Henry wasn't in the lineup. And Tannehill, when he doesn't have a great running game, is not a consistent high-quality quarterback. He's above average, but not a consistent high quality. What makes him an elite quarterback is when Derrick Henry's there. And the play action game and the bootlegs and the rest really work because Henry is so dominant. So it just shows that the Titans as well, that 8-2, I guess now 8-3 record, was heavily predicated upon having Derrick Henry available to push the offense. And without him, until he gets back, they're going to be a little shaky, and you really can't make him the AFC favorite. Especially as the Chiefs start to get back and going, and some other teams, and New England, of course, continues to overachieve. As long as that continues to happen, the Titans aren't the favorite they look like back when Derrick Henry was healthy 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Tannehill, versus some of the coverages that he gets to throw to, I could throw to some of these guys because Derrick Henry is such an incredible threat. So they definitely need him. I was impressed. I don't know if you watched this. It was just a little snippet, but Ryan Tannehill is extremely athletic. He played wide receiver in college, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, and Texas A&M, yep.
When he threw a pick, he hustled after. It was a linebacker, to be fair. He was gaining on him, and he damn near caught him. He was all out until he got blocked and thrown down to the ground. But every once in a while, you get to see how sneaky fast Ryan Tannehill actually is. And they fall to, I believe, 8-3 now. I'm not sure if they've had a bye or yet. No, 8-3 now, 4-2 at home. So you're right about Tyrod Taylor, though. That team is different with Tyrod Taylor. He's not going to stay in the lineup long because he never stays in the lineup long. Whether that's because of an injury or whether that's because just a slightly better quarterback comes along. That seems to be the story of Tyrod Taylor's career. And that's how Justin Herbert got his start. Was the Chargers thought they had their man, at least for a year, in Tyrod Taylor. All of a sudden, he's got a little bit of a rib injury. They try to give him a shot, and they puncture his lung, collapse his lung, and Justin Herbert gets a start, and they never look back because Justin Herbert is really good. And speaking of that, we saw Justin Herbert in Sunday Night Football have a duel with Ben Roethlisberger. No defense to be had in that game. I think it was 41-34. And the Steelers continue to show that the era of Ben Roethlisberger is over. And the Chargers continue to show the era of Justin Herbert is just getting started.
No doubt. I mean, even though they still don't have any home fan base to speak of. So that's why the Vegas always has, difficulty trying to figure out a spread on their so-called home games because it's figuring out how many road fans are going to be there instead. But great offensive performance against the Steelers defense by Justin Herbert. That game was very counter. I thought it'd be a low-scoring game, and it was a crazy high-scoring game. But, that relates to the other NFL news that continues to percolate and present some risk to them, which is that the owner of the St. Louis Rams, now the Los Angeles Rams, where both the Rams and Chargers play, that stadium was mostly built for the Rams owner because he's a real estate mogul who saw an NFL franchise as a way to enrich himself in real estate.
Yeah.
But
the
city of
Chargers
St.
are
Louis,
renting. The Chargers are renting that. It's pathetic, man.
it is. Basically the St. Louis sued the NFL on an interesting theory, which is that the internal rules governing the NFL were actually a contract that they were a third-party beneficiary of, and that because the NFL broke its own rules in the way they allowed that move from St. Louis to LA to take place, and because both the NFL and the Rams owner made false statements during that time period about their intention to move in St. Louis, that they have brought $1 billion plus suit against the NFL. And the other thing they're trying to do is use discovery to get the real books, which the NFL has never wanted to show anybody, including even the union, in terms of the real books, including Jerry Jones's books and some other people. They're willing to risk contempt rather than turn over those books to show what the real bottom line is, to show what the real monetary issue is. And now the St. Louis Rams owner had promised to indemnify the league against any damages from the move, and is apparently looking at settling and getting out of that indemnity and basically sticking the NFL potentially with a multi-billion-dollar judgment in a trial that may be coming up in a couple of months. So it'll be interesting to watch that case, both for its our cities and communities and fan bases, third-party beneficiaries of internal agreements amongst the NFL league owners, because that will sharply restrict the ability of the NFL to screw cities and towns and fan bases in the future. Second, will there be discovery that will disclose the real books of people like Jerry Jones and other people? Because that would be very interesting. It's records, evidence they've hid from everybody. And then third, of course, they may have to write a couple of $1 billion check or give St. Louis its own franchise and expand the league solely to deal with the multi-billion-dollar threat they have from the city of St. Louis. So that'll be an interesting case to watch and monitor that impacts the league. While, of course, John Gruden is now suing the league for their efforts to run him out of the league and engage in cancel culture based on decade-old emails. And it looks like the Raiders and the NFL did not get a severance agreement with John Gruden. And now it'll be interesting to see what comes up and comes out of that case, both from a discovery perspective and future legal precedent perspective. But good for Gruden to sue because it deters and discourages this cancel culture that the NFL's been trying to adapt and enforce over the last couple of years.
Well, I'm so happy that he did sue, and we made this statement here on this channel after that happened. We're like, it's going to be interesting to see if he does sue them. Now, a lot of that was predicated. Did he take a lot of money to walk away? But I don't actually know, because even if he does take money to kind of walk away from the Raiders, does that necessarily negate any of his ability to still go after the NFL? Because his problem wasn't really with the Raiders. The Raiders didn't do anything. The Raiders wanted to keep him there. And at the end of the day, the NFL basically forced them to fire him. And obviously something was worked out with Mark Davis so that he would step down instead of an official firing. But the NFL and Roger Goodell specifically are the ones, quite obviously, who are leaking these things, leaking these private emails with the intention to defame and slander John Gruden, to distract from everything else. So wouldn't it be interesting if in this lawsuit, in discovering this lawsuit, we can open up some of the NFL's headquarters' own emails and kind of play a little bit of, get a little bit of their own medicine when their personal emails are found, and it looks like they were intentionally doing things to fuck up John Gruden and his career. And when it comes to the Rams, same thing with the Chargers. Both the Rams and the Chargers, it was pretty obvious that both teams wanted to move to Los Angeles and wanted to leave wherever they were at before. But they tried to play this game like, oh, well, if the city can do this for us, then I guess we'll stay, knowing full well that they wouldn't. So they played this game. They really lied to a lot of these communities to try to give them hope. So they'd still come to the game. So they'd still do these things. So there's a lot of mad people in St. Louis and San Diego. I was in San Diego for 4.5 years. Including right after the immediate aftermath The first season after they moved to LA, I went to a couple Chargers training camps and a couple Chargers games at that little soccer stadium they played in. And it was embarrassing. They have no fan base in LA. They're all in San Diego, and they're all pissed off at that ownership group for clearly lying to everyone. But what happened? They moved to LA, and overnight, they make money because they're just they're in that space. They're not in St. Louis. They're in LA. They're not in little San Diego. They're in big market Los Angeles. And it'd be interesting to see some comeuppance come from that. I don't know if it'll happen for the Chargers, but definitely for the Rams.
No doubt. It'll be interesting to watch and to see as it goes forward. Credit to the NFL in that at least they have had fewer players make stupid comments about the Rittenhouse acquittals than some other major celebrities, including other sports like the NBA. Jalen Rose was going on saying nonsense live on the air, making stuff up that was totally false. Of course, LeBitch James has been doing his routine for the last year, though he got tossed out of the game, I think, yesterday for throwing some elbows illegally. But at least the NFL was smart enough to, and thank God they don't have Colin Kaepernick in the league, because otherwise Kaepernick would have done severe damage again to the NFL brand by all of the ridiculous and preposterous things he was saying. And for people out there, Kaepernick's not in the league, not just because he badly damages the brand with his insane politics, but because he couldn't hit the right side of a barn at the end of his tenure at San Francisco. Only a Harbaugh could make him look decent for a year or two. Before then, he was terrible. After Harbaugh, he was terrible. He was even bad in Harbaugh's last year. So the guy is no good. Everybody in the league knows he's no good. The league, there'd be plenty of owners that would put him on the field. I mean, look at the league looking at trading different teams, trading for Deshaun Watson, who's credibly accused of dozens and dozens and dozens of assaults on women. So it's not like they're that bothered by off-field behavior. But Kaepernick was both a terrible quarterback and a terrible person, and the combination was too devastating for them to tolerate. But imagine if he was still in the league. He would have created a smear camp. He was smearing Kyle Rittenhouse, saying a ludicrous, ridiculous, preposterous things, and the league would have taken another 10, 20% hit like they've been taking every year that they've engaged in this woke politics nonsense. So at least credit to the league that they don't have Kaepernick to deal with, and they had fewer players say dumb stuff that they couldn't shut up the NBA from players from saying. And so at least they have that going for them.
The NBA is completely run by the players, and it's listen, some owners might get in trouble for saying this like they did in Houston. But when you let the inmates run the prison, you see what happens in the NBA. That's not the way it is in the NFL, like it or not. The players have a lot less leeway when it comes to certain things. And sometimes that's a bad thing, but sometimes in terms of them not speaking out so often about political bullshit, it's a good thing. And you've seen the results. A lot more money. It makes them a lot more money, and you've seen it in the results when it comes to the ratings. The NFL ratings, although they dipped last year, definitively they dipped, and they had their worst ratings in a couple years. It wasn't near the drop-off, like the 50% drop-off that the NBA had, because their players continue to run their mouths. And speaking of LeBitch James, I know this is we're doing Monday Evening Quarterback here, but you got to at least look at what he did. Look at this. This wasn't even an elbow when you slow it down.
And right there,
a back fist.
Well, LeBron James started.
It was
he started.
It was a bitch punch.
Yeah, it was a closed fist. He hit him basically right here. It was an absolute bitch move, and he ran away and hid behind all this team. Didn't want anything to do with Isaiah Simmons. He would have absolutely destroyed him. So
yeah.
He wanted it too. He wanted the smoke, and LeBron wanted none of it. So, but yeah, I don't know how we got on that tangent, but absolutely. Another game I did want to talk about, and we'll hit all the super chats and members and stuff like that, guys, after the NFL segment. Another game I wanted to hit on was Packers-Vikings. Aaron Rodgers back from his break due to COVID, his second game back. And they lose to the Minnesota Vikings. Big rivalry game, Wisconsin, Minnesota. And the Vikings are tough to figure out. I don't know if they've had any games that aren't close this year. They seem to always be close games. We were talking about before the stream. That defense just cannot really stop people anymore, even though that offense has some great weapons. And Kirk Cousins is effective. Now, every once in a while, you're going to have a Kirk Cousins game where he just looks like shit. But for the most part, that offense is very effective with Justin Jefferson on one side, Adam Thielen on the other, and Cook doing his thing in the backfield, who's facing his own legal issues potentially. But the number one team in the NFC loses in the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, it was a great game, great finish to the game. I think within the last 2.5 minutes, there was like 3 scores. So it was maybe even 4 scores. So it was a lot of fun down the stretch. Classic rivalry between the NFC North, or NFC Norse, as some used to call them, division. And what it reflects also is how much key talent defines the league, because Zimmer and his offensive staff, some of the best coaches in the NFL. Zimmer's been one of the best defensive minds in the NFL, and had one of the top 10 defense pretty consistently until about 2-3 years ago. And it's because personnel dictates performance in the NFL far more than coaching does. And it's just more evidence of that even with a great coach and a great coaching staff, without that key personnel, the defense is no longer an elite defense. In fact, it's a below average defense week in, week out. And it's similar to Seattle. Seattle had one of the great defenses of all time for multiple years, won and got back to the Super Bowl with that, built on that defense. And once they lost key personnel, they've never been a top 5 defense since. And so we're just seeing that about 15 years ago, the league shifted to a personnel-driven league. It was always personnel dominant, but not so much so that coaching really is almost irrelevant. There's very few coaches in the league that week in, week out make a difference. Now, Zimmer's one of them, one of the most successful coaches against the spread in NFL history, along with Belichick and Andy Reid.
Andy Reid, yeah.
Both of those guys are big, but they're the rarities for the most part. If you don't have the talent, you don't see performance. And the Vikings have not been able to replace key defensive personnel, and until they do, they're going to probably be a playoff team, but they would be a long shot to make a run because that defense is so porous that, they had to come back 2 or 3 times to win that game. And the only thing that benefited them is they were able to finally run out the clock. Otherwise, Rodgers probably would have come back and scored. And if anybody thought COVID was some great danger to NFL quarterbacks and being unvaccinated was some great risk, look at Aaron Rodgers. He looks just fine. No issues there at all. So that was interesting to watch and to witness as well, in the sense of people see his performance. And unlike these other athletes that are dropping dead in surprising numbers not long after they've taken the shot, Rodgers looks in perfect position, in perfect condition, and in perfect health. So it's interesting to see that disparity. Looks like he made the right choice at what he did for his own body.
Well, it's so ridiculous that the vax mandates for athletes, because you're literally talking, when you're looking at the vast majority of people in professional sports, you're looking at people between the ages of 20 and 39 in peak physical condition. And those are people that are least at risk, other than, kids, basically, which you're also trying to force a jab on kids. But those are the people least at risk from this virus to have any actual long-term effects. Will there be one in a while? Yeah, sure. But they're also the people, these very physically active young men, they're also the people that are the highest risk from possible side effects from the jab. So that's a big decision for a lot of these guys to make. And it's not one that they should be forced to make, even though a lot of times that's where it's going to, especially in the NBA. Not so much in the NFL. I do think that Aaron Rodgers, I think he made a mistake by intentionally misleading people about it. Because he obviously, misled people, and that's why it blew up so much. You knew they were going to hammer anybody that they find out that doesn't take the jab. They're going to hammer them. But we saw that case with Kirk Cousins. It was there for a few days, kind of went away. Same with other people. But that, and same thing with Antonio Brown now. Antonio Brown, there's rumors that he forged a vax card. And I don't know if I believe that, but also that's a very Antonio Brown case. But either way, it should be no one's business what these guys choose to do with their bodies. And the fact that it's become such a crazy topic in the NFL, it's disappointing that they're more worried about that than they are about Deshaun Watson, sexual assaults on 24 women or whatever it is.
No doubt about it. So but yeah, it was a fun, eventful week in the NFL. More upsets every week, more surprises every week, and probably overarching as we're past the midpoint season in this inaugural 18-game season. To me, the biggest surprise is, the Arizona Cardinals being 9-2 and winning with Colt McCoy on the road in Seattle was surprised, but that was more about Russell Wilson's just inability to play well since he's come back than it was, entirely Colt McCoy torching him, though that was a bit surprising. But is the performance of New England Patriots with a rookie quarterback. To go out there with a rookie quarterback and now lead the AFC East right now, that's really amazing. Shut out Atlanta 25-0, just totally dominant. They've had some dominating performances, and some of their losses have been narrow, close losses, like Tampa Bay at home, as the game you saw. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. The other quarterback news is, why is Russell Wilson not performing? And can Cam Newton make a turnaround comeback? Almost brought him back to win last week for Carolina.
With only a week. That's with only a week and a half in that system, too. That was impressive for Cam, only a week and a half in that system. As a Christian McCaffrey fantasy owner, I not a huge fan that Cam Newton's going to be getting so many fucking goal line carries yet again. But maybe it will free up Christian McCaffrey a little bit more. But, the Panthers, they have a shot. They do have a shot to get in the playoffs with this extra seed, especially. And what a story that would be if Cam Newton is able to do that. Not a big Cam fan, but it was cool to see that first game back against the Cardinals, him get a couple of those touches. And now this game that they probably should have won. He missed a couple throws late, I think, because he's a little bit rusty, probably not used to that system and those players. But you're right about Russell Wilson. I think Russell Wilson came back too early. When he first got injured, had that surgery on his finger, we were told 4 to 8 weeks. And I believe he came back in like 5. So he was back early, and you can just tell that his grip on the football is not the same. At least that's what it seems to me. Because before this, he was putting up kind of typical Russell Wilson numbers, got injured, and things have been bad since he came back. And that Arizona Cardinals team, even with Colt McCoy, they look bad against the Panthers, but they've rolled. They haven't had to rush Kyler Murray back because they've just looked fine with Colt McCoy and all those weapons they have on offense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the only other question with Wilson is there was always an open, everybody always wanted them to become a pass-oriented offense because of Wilson's capabilities. But a lot of analytics folks had doubts about that because their argument was the reason why Wilson's numbers were so good is because they were known as such a run-dominant offense. And if they actually shifted to a pass-dominant offense, would the league adjust in a way that would limit some of the best things that Russell Wilson does in the play-action game? That if the play-action is not really a threat anymore because they're not really that committed to a run and they don't have a Marshawn Lynch, the beast back there, that maybe he won't be as effective as he was for a period of time at the beginning of 2020. And so I think that plus the injury are the two things to really watch how much he can bounce back. And if they keep losing games, they might as well let him rest out and completely heal because they're not far away from being out of the playoff hunt if they don't turn it around fast. And when you lose to the likes of Arizona at home in Seattle, one of the best home field advantages in all of pro football, that was not a good indicator, especially after getting, looking bad against Green Bay the week before. So I think they really need Wilson to turn it around quickly if they're going to invest much in the rest of this season.
Yeah, they're 3-7 now. So realistically, if they want to make it in, they probably can only lose one of their next several games. That'd be finishing the season at 9-8. And I just don't know if that's a possibility. I guess you play until you lose maybe one more and maybe then make the plan to sit him. But, real quick to hit on that other surprise you talked about, the Pats. You said it before about personnel and how it dictates things. And we've seen Bill Belichick be very reluctant to pay players more than he feels like they're worth throughout his entire history there as a GM. And I think even more so than the testament to Bill Belichick as a coach, I think he's showing, his value as a GM and what they've been able to sustain there, even through all this. Last year with Cam, they went 500, I believe, or they went 7-9. And now with Mac Jones back there, that's more about what they want to do as a team. And he's managing the game and playing effectively. They got him a great tight end in Hunter Henry. And, if Hunter Henry can stay healthy, that's always the question with him. But yeah, the Pats continue to roll. To be fair, they rolled over the Atlanta Falcons, who have maybe only scored 3 points in their last 2 games. And Matt Ryan just looks like he's done. Matt Ryan looks really done. The Falcons reloaded, spending that 4th overall pick to get Kyle Pitts. And when they made that decision, they also kind of made an investment in Matt Ryan. Because if you're going to make that move when you could have got one of these good young quarterbacks that everybody was talking about, that has to at least be an indication you're sticking with Matt Ryan for 2 more years, you would assume, after moving Julio Jones. Now, what are they going to do? Because Matt Ryan truly looks like he's washed.
Yeah, I think, and with quarterbacks, when they collapse, they are suddenly, they have a sudden collapse. They just fall off a cliff. It's not a steady erosion. So how he performs the next couple of games will be critical to whether, like Roethlisberger, there's anything left in the tank. And there may be sporadically, Big Ben at times has shown up just through willpower, but it's clear the talent is no longer there. And Ryan at this point, if he doesn't bounce back, they're going to need to move on from him going into next season, unless there's a real bounce back, because they're another team that just hasn't survived losing the Super Bowl. But they have probably been the worst at that, at not bouncing back from that huge lead they blew to Tom Brady in their own home stadium for the Super Bowl. And they haven't been the same since, and they continue to get worse and worse. And especially, when, they let Julio Jones go and some other decisions they made and replaced him with other personnel. But ultimately, they were banking on Ryan bouncing back to Pro Bowl form, and he just has not.
Yeah, and I think that it'd be one thing if they had a really solid offensive line back there, but they just don't. And Matt Ryan doesn't have a lot of time, and he's not a guy that can do anything at this point in his career. He's a statue back there. He does not move well, and it's a bad combination in Atlanta, unfortunately. And if you're a Kyle Pitts owner, it's an unfortunate situation too.
Yes, no doubt.
Yeah, that's the struggle that I've been having the past few weeks, but that's all right. Well, the rest of my team's fucking solid. But let me hit a couple of these super chats. I'm going to move on to some college football news, because we're getting really close to the end in college football, and it's going to be exciting coming down. Sir Ruin of House Roundhead brings up something I had no need to talk about. I would say I'm sorry about the Bears' loss yesterday, but I'm a Ravens fan. Sorry, Ryan. I'm amazed the Ravens won without Lamar Jackson. Well, Lamar Jackson was out. Somehow the Bears managed to throw that game away, even with a very late 4th down touchdown bomb from Andy Dalton, who is subbing in for the injured Justin Fields. The Bears defense still gave up this game, unfortunately. And the Bears now have the longest losing streak in football, now that the Lions actually had a tie under their belts. And Matt Nagy, I would imagine, I don't know what to think anymore. The Bears management is so terrible. They let Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace draft Justin Fields, which often buys you a couple more years as a head coach GM pair. And I wish they hadn't, because I don't think there's any hope moving forward with the Chicago Bears franchise with those guys. I think they've just shown over and over again, whether it comes to drafting and evaluating talent, whether it comes to actual in-game play calling, they're not the guys. And if that doesn't tell you it, not even being able to beat the Baltimore Ravens without Lamar Jackson, it's really time to move on. But I'm glad that your team won, Sir Ruin. Brian Cates becomes a channel member. Thank you very much, Brian. We appreciate that. Welcome to the MVP level. Now, we have a couple things to talk about in the college football realm. And I guess first of all, we might as well talk about Dan Mullen. And it's a tough life as an SEC head coach, if your name is not Nick Saban, because there's not a whole lot of leash for a lot of these guys. And Florida went from being on the cusp of defeating Alabama, a 2-point conversion away, top 10 ranking, all of this, to now Dan Mullen is no longer with the Florida Gators. They're going to be moving at a different path in the future. What's your take on this, Robert, for who you think Florida might go after, and what's it going to take for that team down there?
Well, it shows the difficulties of coaching in the SEC in the Nick Saban era and in the modern era. because, you look at Phil Fulmer, who started it all, with national title winning coaches being fired. Gene Chizik won a national title at Auburn, fired a few years later. Gus Malzahn got him to the national title, was partially credited with winning the national title that year when he was offensive coordinator at Auburn. He, too, fired after a few years at Auburn. Les Miles wins a national title at LSU. He gets fired. Ed Orgeron wins a national title at LSU. He gets fired. So it's amazing that the number of national title appearing or winning coaches that have been canned in the SEC. I mean, even Steve Spurrier quit at South Carolina before South Carolina could fire him. So, even the legend there, one of the legends was on the chopping block. I mean, you're talking when you have Hall of Fame coaches like Fulmer and Spurrier get fired or have to resign, it tells you how tough it is in the SEC because of Nick Saban's dominance. Puts a shadow on all of it. I mean, Mark Richt was close to several national titles. He got fired at Georgia. So now, and it's also an interesting timing because you have, you look at top coaching jobs in college football and you're really looking at their proximity to talent. Are they within a half day's drive of a lot of talent? And there's about 10 programs in the country that are just a tier above everybody else in the sense of access to talent. And you could argue really there's an Elite Eight because there's a couple of those that are marginal. And, at least 3 of them now are open. USC, Florida, and Texas. Yeah. All 3 jobs open this year. You might get Miami open. You also have good, solid mid-tier programs. Washington, Texas Tech, TCU, Virginia Tech, also open. And so you have an unusually wide open, big team, big program places. And the question is, where do people go? Because there's not an obvious choice for any of those programs. It's like, who exactly is USC going to hire? Who exactly is Florida going to hire? And I think it's a Texas earlier. I mean, who's LSU going to hire? So you got LSU, top 8 program. The last 3 coaches to coach there have won national titles. Florida, Urban Meyer won several national titles. Steve Spurrier won a national title there. Clearly a top 8 level program because they're right in the middle of the state. And then that's Florida's arguably the most talent rich. You can argue about Texas and California. USC sits in the most talent anywhere because they've got no meaningful competition. UCLA is a marginal competitor for football talent in LA and Southern California. And so USC, and they have a program that not only has huge boosters, it's not under major local media scrutiny because the celebrities suck up all the media scrutiny. And so you don't get the same negative attention you might get elsewhere.
And you're in the Pac-12. It's kind of thing that allowed Reggie Bush to get away with so much, and for them to have Snoop Dogg on the sidelines, like all these things at USC.
And Suge Knight, while he was under federal criminal investigation, was on the sidelines. So I think if I was a coach, the best gig is USC because you have the weakest competition because you're in the Pac-12. And you have the biggest talent base, even more so than Florida, even more so than LSU. Probably number 2. And what's interesting is this is a reversal from 15 years ago. 15 years ago, you would have said Florida was a better job than LSU. Now, because Nick Saban put them on them, they've always been a sleeping tiger in that there's so much talent in Louisiana, and the school's brand dominates. I mean, almost every high school program has purple and gold in their uniforms. There's no meaningful competition for talent out of Louisiana. Unlike, say, Texas, where you have Texas Tech, TCU, Texas A&M, Houston, SMU. You have a lot of programs with a history of quality programs. And LSU, number 2 is what? Louisiana Tech, UL Monroe, UL Lafayette. These are not competitors.
Nobody. Yeah.
So I think Louisiana would be the most tempting. Now, the only caveat would be 2 title-winning coaches have both been fired from the program, including Orgeron, just a little more than a year removed from winning the national title and putting forth the best LSU team in the history of not only LSU, but arguably the history of all of college football. And so it tells you the standards. And then you look at Florida, pretty much nobody lasts 4 years there now unless they win a national title. Urban Meyer's the only one to last for more than 4 years. So even Dan Mullen, 1 year removed from being in the college football playoffs potentially within a play or 2 in the game against Alabama, has one poor season and really just a poor second half. They probably should have beat Alabama earlier in the year. It was the second half that the sort of the wheels fell off. Now, Florida was one of my teams that I said expect to underperform and underachieve because there was too much expectations because the real backstory of Mullen is he didn't recruit well. USC was constantly underperforming, so no surprise the firing took place there. LSU, there was always doubts about Orgeron. The Orgeron really only had 2020 and this year's is half of a bad season and one bad season. Before that, it was either good or great seasons. But the doubts with Orgeron was his on-field coaching ability dating back to his Ole Miss days. So I think that if I know who Florida would like. Florida would like Urban Meyer to quit the Jaguars and come back to Florida.
Yeah, really, that's what we're asking, right? It's which of these teams is going to lure Urban Meyer away. That is the overall. No one thinks that he's going to stay there in Jacksonville, and he's already pretty close to Gainesville in Jacksonville. I'm sure they'd like a reunion.
Exactly. Now the thing with him is he didn't like coaching against Saban each year, so he made that clear. It would make a lot more sense for Urban Meyer to go to USC, where you have a prime gig, where they don't care about your off-field issues, where they don't worry about culture like they do at Florida. You can kind of do what you want. You get to dominate in the Pac-12. I mean, who's going to really compete against you? But the big question is, I think Urban Meyer does want out of I think he thought he made a mistake by turning down Texas and going to the pros. And we can't completely rule out Texas making a dramatic move, because even though Sarkisian is his first year, he wasn't supposed to fail to go bowling in his first year and lose to Kansas at home as a 31-point favorite either. So and clearly the clock is fast. And I think the other reason why Florida pulled the trigger is the one of the big people out there is Mario Cristobal at Oregon, because he's originally from Miami. And the thought process is that Miami might fire Manny Diaz for Mario Cristobal. Once Oregon lost last week to Utah, the belief is that he might be on the market, whereas he wouldn't have been if they'd been in the college football playoffs. Though Oregon's got a lot of money and a lot of cash, it still doesn't have the local regional recruiting base that Florida's programs have. And if Florida State is still may still fire their coach, unless he really runs the table and beats Florida this week and makes it to a bowl game. He probably was on the – so you could have all three Florida programs looking for a head coach. But there's no obvious choices, because, you look out there, the mid-tier programs that have coaches are really inexperienced. Whether you're talking about the coach at Louisiana Lafayette, you're talking about the coach at Coastal Carolina, you don't have any obvious hot commodities. Some of the ones that could be, the Cincinnati head coach, the Iowa State head coach, have made clear they're not really interested in leaving. Apparently, Lincoln Riley already said no to LSU. That means he's saying no to Florida. Doesn't mean he'll say no to USC, though. USC would be the logical place for him to go, because USC is an improvement over Oklahoma.
And it would be the same type of situation where he's in a conference that there's not going to be a ton of competition. He's going to be the big dog there, especially because Texas is moving to the SEC. Not that they're really a threat right now anyway, but the overall elephant in the room with any of those SEC schools is Nick Saban. Nobody wants to go. I shouldn't say that. It's going to make people hesitate to go to LSU and go to Florida when Nick Saban has ended so many of those people's reigns there, because they continue to be dominant. Now, Georgia.
And then you add Kirby Smart into the equation, sort of the next coming of potentially of Nick Saban, who looks like he'll have the number one recruiting class again, who's going to have an undefeated season with a backup quarterback most of the year. There's nobody weak on either side of the SEC, and then they're about to add Texas and Oklahoma to that equation. The payout and the ego is what will drive someone to take one of those jobs. So and I don't think Urban Meyer needs either. So I think if he wanted to get back in the college game, USC makes a lot more sense than Florida or LSU or even Miami or other programs. Mario Cristobal, I think, would only leave Oregon for Miami. I don't think he'll leave it for any other place, because there's just so much Nike money there that changes the equation for Oregon. And he can stay top dog in a good conference without the competition he would face each week in the SEC, even though his style of coaching is SEC kind of football more than it is Pac-12 kind of football. But I think otherwise it's not clear who any of these programs are going to get, unless they steal some people from the pros or steal some assistants, like Kendall Briles is a hot assistant at Arkansas because of his offensive success in multiple programs. I don't think Lane Kiffin would be a good choice for any of these programs. Kiffin has underperformed at every time he steps up in class. So they stepped up in class at Tennessee, underperformed, stepped up in class at the Raiders, underperformed, stepped up in class at USC. If you can't win at USC, you can't dominate USC, it makes no sense for Florida or LSU to pick. And controversy always follows them. Kiffin is best at a mid-tier program using his notoriety and public attention drives to get attention to a program that otherwise would be off the radar screen. He's not a guy to put under the spotlight. Every place he's been under the spotlight he's been a disaster.
He's the guy whose bark has always been bigger than his bite. That's who he is. I mean, he talks like it's a lot of attention.
You want to give him the fourth bite at the apple under the big spotlight? I mean, why? So I think they would like Matt Rule to come back to college. No sign he has any interest in it at all. But I think Joe Brady, the offensive coordinator at the Panthers, who was the head coach, who's the offensive coordinator for LSU in their great year, I think he'll be on some people's radar screens. I think Dan Mullen may end up either at a mid-tier program taking a year off, or he may want to see what he can do at the pros, because the reality is Mullen has always been a pro-style coach. He hates recruiting. And so, and that's why he was not a good fit at Florida. Great offensive mind, but he was mostly good picking defensive coordinators at Mississippi State, only 1 or 2 years, but he had been mostly bad at picking defensive coordinators at Florida. And it's clear he doesn't like recruiting. So he would be best at a program where recruiting is secondary, or going up to the NFL, because that's his personality. He's not really a college coach. And he got fired because he lost the team. When you go into Missouri and neither your offense nor defense can perform, one of the worst teams in the SEC this year, after you got blown out the week before by lowly South Carolina, by the Fighting Chickens, you're in a little bit of trouble. And so not a big surprise, a little surprised at how that they pulled the trigger before Florida State, but not a surprise that they ultimately pulled the trigger. But I think it'll be really interesting where these programs go, because there are, unlike past years, there are not any obvious choices for any of these programs.
Yeah, it's a mess. There's a lot of openings and a lot of people that want to avoid certain places. It's going to be a shit show in this offseason, to be sure, especially all these big programs. Like I said, basically every big Florida college. But one of the teams you mentioned in there was Cincinnati. And with Oregon losing to Utah, it definitely looks like it's opened the door to kind of lock Cincinnati in that playoff spot, which I don't know if the college football group is going to want to do that.
Yeah, I think we'll see if they try to leapfrog Michigan, because Michigan plays Ohio State this week. But even if they leapfrog Michigan, either Michigan or Ohio State will be out the next week. And I don't think they can leapfrog Cincinnati again. So it looks to me like Cincinnati will finally be, despite the great efforts of the playoff committee to keep them out, Cincinnati will probably be in the playoffs, and they'll probably get a rematch at this point with Georgia. The question I have is, if Alabama were to lose to Auburn this week, or Georgia in the SEC title game, do they keep Alabama in the top 4 even with 2 losses? I don't think any team has ever made the college football playoff with 2 losses, but it's obvious the playoff committee loves Alabama, because they had them up there even over undefeated teams earlier in the season. But it does set up an interesting, I think Auburn has had a history of surprising Alabama. I just can't see it happening this year. But I think the Michigan-Ohio State game, the question is, will it live up to its billing, or will it be Harbaugh's curse again to get crushed? And I think it's in Ann Arbor. This Harbaugh really, to regain the confidence of Michigan fans, more so than the season he's had, which has been a very good season. And we predicted it would be above expectations. That ticket's already cashed for people who took it. They won more games than expected. But he really needs to at least be competitive with Ohio State. Doesn't have to beat him yet. Needs to beat him at some point, but needs to be competitive. Otherwise, he can't have another one of these 30-point blowouts. Though Ohio State has been bulldozing ranked opponents over the last 2 weeks. I mean, they made Michigan State look like nothing last week.
Yeah, they beat the shit out of Michigan State. And that's a Michigan State team that really came back and beat Michigan in a game that Michigan really had put away. And Michigan let them creep back in that game, and has really changed the tide for them in the course of this season, where now this game is what it is. You got to win at Michigan. You got to win versus Ohio State. At least once, Jim Harbaugh.
Huge game for Harbaugh. Huge game. He's got to get over the hump. If he can't get over the hump this year in Ann Arbor, when is he ever going to get over the hump? But
Yeah,
I
this
think
is the
probably the most
season. This is the season. This is the team. If it doesn't happen now, it's not going to happen. And for all the diehard Michigan guys, I know a lot of them, half of my family's from the Ann Arbor area. Even though they curse Harbaugh, they don't want him fired because they love the Harbaughs. You got to get over that if you want your team to win.
because he's not catching up in recruiting. So, if he can't catch up with scheming with this talent, it's not like it happen anytime soon. Though probably the most fun rivalry game this week, and there's a lot. You got the Apple Cup, you got the Oregons going at each other and so forth. It will probably be on Thanksgiving Day with Kiffin and Leach up against each other, given that Leach has had a bounce back season with Mississippi State. The quarterback set new records, broke Dak Prescott's records there. They've both been complimenting each other unusually during the week, saying the other's
that's more
the
of a
greatest.
coach matchup. That's more of a coach matchup than we care about what's on the field, honestly, because those are two of the guys that everyone is always wondering what they're going to say and what they're going to do. Mike Leach, one of the most eccentric dudes out there. And like we talked about, Lane Kiffin, just a guy who's going to talk himself up and talk a lot of shit to everybody. So that will be interesting on Thanksgiving Day. And personally, I'm invested in the old Oak and Bucket game. I think Purdue, I want Purdue to smash IU. I think, was IU on your underperform list this year? I think they were.
They're one of my top 5 underperforming teams of the year.
Oh, yeah. You knew they were going to be garbage.
That ticket cashed like week 4. Same with, Iowa State, badly underperformed. North Carolina, badly underperformed. So I think 4 of the 5, the only team that has actually performed a little bit better than I expected was Ole Miss. Their defense was good enough to stay competitive. I mean, not to the level people thought, but this game will probably decide, their win total over under. Now Mississippi State, I think, has already cashed their ticket. They're over, but Ole Miss, I think it may depend on this game. I'm not certain, but it'll be a fun little egg bowl. It usually is. It's a great, Ole Miss and Oxford are great places to see a game. The whole cocktail row leading in is fantastic. They have the best cocktails in all of college football for a pregame experience. And so I think it'll be, be a fun, good game, and probably the most fun matchup between these two crazy over the top coaches. Though the one everyone will be watching will be Ohio State, Michigan, the big tip. But my own take, I don't think it's going to be competitive unless Ohio State steps back, and CJ Stroud may win the Heisman in that game if he has another big game.
Yeah, it's going to be, I think it's probably going to be a 3-score victory for Ohio State. It's really where I see it. I wish it wasn't the case. I wish it would be better than that, but that's just how I see it with the way Ohio State's been rolling. And, they had the fortunate timing to have an early loss and work out the things they needed to work out. They weren't, no one was, trying to excuse things away. Oh, don't worry, we'll get by. No, they lost early, realized they had things to work on and fix, and they fixed them. They've been rolling ever since. And if it does kind of all work out the way that we think, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and Cincinnati in the college football playoff, I don't know. There's going to be a lot of people that want to keep Cincinnati out, but at this point, I don't think you can.
Agreed. And I think, and Georgia with that backup quarterback with Stetson Bennett is not, even though I have a preseason ticket on Georgia to win the national title, I wouldn't be doubling down on that bet if Stetson Bennett's still the quarterback come playoff time, because that's just a gamble. That puts a cap and a ceiling on their offensive capabilities. Alabama, as they showed last week, continues to show defensive vulnerabilities at surprising times, because Arkansas ran all over them, which was a real surprise given how well Alabama's defense had been playing of late. Ohio State still has some defensive vulnerabilities, but they've been getting better, and their offense is as good as it's ever been. They've really hit a midseason stride. And Cincinnati can hang with anybody. Now, there's a massive talent disparity between Cincinnati and those other 3 teams, but they've shown they have a senior veteran quarterback that has diverse talent and a smart strategic defense, such that they can pick off an upset here or there against any one of those teams. But I wouldn't. I would say if I were making a favorite right now to win it all, if Georgia sticks with Stetson Bennett, I would actually make Ohio State the slight favorite to win the national title right now.
That would be a hell of an interesting turnabout if that happened. This is the first time that we have seen Georgia look like they're clearly better than Alabama. And not by a ton, but it just looks like it. The way that they've performed this year, especially against similar opponents. It's not always the end all be all, but that's all we have to look at right now. And Georgia looks dominant as hell. Alabama struggled against Arkansas, who Georgia beat the shit out of a few weeks ago.
Massive defensive difference between those teams. The big X factor is at quarterback for Georgia. What if they happen to have one of those games where they either have some turnovers or the defense slips up enough? Because the thing is, so far in the college football playoff era, really elite offenses have bulldozed even really elite defenses. So what happens when they face an Alabama? What happens when they face an Ohio State? Because the amazing thing this year, especially once the wheels fell off for Florida, Georgia, Tennessee's a good offense, but not an elite offense. Georgia hasn't played any elite offenses all year because Clemson's offense stunk, particularly early in the season. So in at least the last couple of years, it's been like Michigan. Michigan would dominate all these average offenses. Then they would play Ohio State, and Ohio State would put up 50. And so it's the nature of those new offenses is, can the defense keep them in the game when they face an elite offense without an elite offense of their own? And I think that puts Georgia more vulnerable than some other favorites going into the playoff season.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of the playoffs, we did get a super chat from Copenhagen for $5. I think they should expand the playoff. What's y'all's thoughts on that? I think it makes the sport more interesting. Of course. It should be like Division II in college football, or FCS, as it's now called, or is it FBS, whichever way it is. The football, because you look at it, I mean, there you get 16 teams, 32 teams. You get to incorporate home field advantage, so the regular season still matters. My view is at least 16 teams, or merely make it top 20, let the first 4 teams have a bye. And, why not? And you go into late January. And maybe you trim a game off the regular season. And so you're not playing too many games. But then you would have, 8 teams maybe that would play 14 or 15 games, a game or two more than they do now. I don't see that as being that big a deal. And if you tie it in monetarily, you can substitute for whatever game they scratch on the regular season. They really don't need 4 non-conference games. You could do 3, and you could probably scratch at least 1 conference game potentially. But let's say you didn't. Let's say you just scratched a non-conference game. A lot of those non-conference games are jokes anyway. They're just money makers. And go to a playoff, and only, again, a small percentage of teams would be in the playoff. So it's not like it's impacting that many players, that many kids. So I think it would be much more interesting. College football would be a lot more fun if it had a tournament. I mean, look at March Madness. March Madness is fun because it also would guarantee little guys would get a shot. So your Cincinnati's would always get a shot. Your, UT San Antonio's, if they went undefeated, might have a shot. I think there should be a balance, because you look at March Madness, and it is by far the most exciting way of any of the big sporting events that we have of deciding a champion. It's also the worst way to determine the most deserving champion. You know what I mean?
Because it elevates postseason play over regular season play.
Exactly, especially when we're not talking about like the NBA. We're not talking about a series. We're not talking about best 4 out of 7. We're talking about one game where anything can happen, and a bunch of one games where anything can happen. When it comes to college football playoff, I've always been an advocate that 8. I think that 8 is like almost the perfect number to still keep the purity, I guess, of the college football playoff, of truly only taking people who are deserving of winning a national title because they've performed that way. They have that level of talent. But at the same time, if you take 8, you're also going to be guaranteed to take whoever that one person is, that one person that has, like a Cincinnati that has an undefeated season, like UCF a couple years ago. 8 will kind of guarantee that you have that one outlier in there that they do get a shot, even if they weren't able to play the best, the best schedule because of scheduling conflicts and things like that, because people don't want to schedule all these out of conference games with them. That gives them a chance to show what they can do. On the same token, you're still going to be letting in 2 SEC teams, probably 3, honestly. Let's just be real. You're probably going to get 3 SEC teams if they open it up to 8, but then you'll still get a champion from every other conference as well. Nobody can bitch about it. That number 9 team's always going to fucking bitch. In the NCAA, the 69th team that's not in there bitches, we deserved it. We could have had a chance. It's like everyone's always going to bitch about not being let in. But I think 8 gives you a very reasonable number of games to deal with. and you also only had deserving people there, was still giving the right people a chance.
Yeah, I mean, my idea for top 20 would be that the 16 team, the top 4 would get 2 buys, so that basically the next 16 would play 2 rounds for the opportunity to be in an Elite 8 with the top 4. And now that would be that'd be 4 or 5 potential extra games. So that's probably the most criticism, but it's worked at the lower divisions of college football for some time. So I don't think it really would be that taxing physically or academically. But it would be how to blend it in monetarily. And then the other utility is you could make every conference champion eligible automatically. They could be a part of that top 20, and then it's the top, say, 15 or 12, whatever it is. Kind of like the way March Madness does, but not as expansive. But if you allowed, it will also give basically the Cinderella always an outside shot at a fun upset, which I think would be fun. But I think they are going to a direction of expansion, but I think it might go 6 and they give the top 2 a bye, that kind of routine. I think that's probably the most they'll do, though the bowls have become less and less profitable over time. So I don't know. That was the real holdback to a playoff system, was the bowls. The bowls are becoming, are declining in ratings and other aspects. So if the bowls start to shrink in their money-making capability, that's when you'll suddenly see them decide an expanded playoff is a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. There's your answer, Copenhagen. Both of us think they should expand it. If Jeremy was on here, he'd be saying, no expansion, because he's a fucking Alabama fan.
Yes.
Mike Hill for $5 says, one team that definitely doesn't belong in the top 10 was Wake Forest after that ass whooping against Clemson. Yeah, Wake Forest got the shit stomped out of them by Clemson, a very bad Clemson team. The ACC is just not good this year. That's the bottom line.
Wake is one of the least talented teams. It's a very well coached team by David Clawson, especially if they have multiple year seniors like they do currently. That puts them in a great position offensively, but they have very limited talent, and they have, their defense is porous. And so Clemson was able to finally run the ball some, and they're able to blow them out, even though Wake Forest put up an impressive, I think it was the most impressive offensive performance against Clemson all year long. It's just not enough when your defense, when you lack that degree of talent disparity, you're not going to overcome week in, week out. That's tough to do. Though another coaching opening probably in the ACC, it looks like David Cutcliffe may be retiring soon, because Duke is, they just got 62-20 crushed by Louisville. There's not a lot left in the tank there, and it's probably time for the legend to step back.
I don't know if that one's too desirable, though.
Nobody wants the Duke job.
Yeah,
outside of your Dave Clawson type.
There's so many restrictions, because of academics and things like that at Duke, and I think that they have definitely overachieved based on their talent levels in the past. So that's never somewhere that anybody really wants to go. No. You have the outlier in like Notre Dame, where they obviously are concerned with academics, but that's a much different story than Duke is, obviously. Richard E. Normus for Canadian $5. What advice would you give to someone trying to get into football? Which team should I follow? I guess it depends if you're talking college or the NFL.
It depends on whether you're looking at. I always say the biggest team I'm cheering for is whoever I got money on. But though I'm a Tennessee fan, college football fan going way back as a kid. But it really sort of depends. Some people follow their local fans, wherever they are geographically. Others follow a team based on certain personnel or a coaching scheme. Coach K at Duke built up a fan base based on people who liked him. Bobby Knight at Indiana, same dynamic. So, it depends on what it is you're interested in the sport. Maybe you like a certain style of play. Maybe you like a certain personality that's a player. Maybe you like a place just because it's nearby and you can be part of a community of fans, or just, cheer for whoever you got money on. The nice thing about cheering for your money is then you can change your team every week depending on who it is.
If you're trying to get in the NFL, I'll give you a team to follow, and I think that's the Arizona Cardinals, because I think that they are, with Kyler Murray, with that offense, I think that they're going to be a fun team for at least a couple years to follow, and I think they're going to be very relevant.
And a coach who got his job after being fired in college.
That's crazy. That's crazy that happened
insane?
that way.
Yeah. So it turned out, just because a coach is fired doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. It just means they weren't a good fit for where they were at.
And it's not like
But
he was at like Florida or USC, right? Texas Tech, right? So
yeah, Texas Tech.
that was crazy. Was he at Texas Tech when Mike Evans? Because Mike Evans went to Tech, right?
I'm blanking on that right now. I should remember. I can
think he
see him
did.
in my mind, but
Remember
I can't
that
remember which.
score against Texas? That's what I vividly remember. Mike Evans in college. The game was on the line, and he caught a pass at like the 10-yard line and the 5-yard line, and time was like expiring. And instead of stepping out, he
wasn't
turned
that
and
Michael
went.
Crabtree?
Oh, you're right. That was Michael Crabtree. That was Texas Tech Michael Crabtree. So where did fucking Mike Evans go?
I can remember him in college, but
A&M. Thank you, guys. He went to Texas A&M.
Yes, that's where he was. So hey, that Texas part right.
There you go.
But yeah, we'll see. And then tonight's game for preview. I mean, Tampa Bay heavily favored, expected to crush the Giants. I lean towards the Giants on the spread, first half wise, and don't think Tampa Bay will necessarily put up a lot of points. But it is Tom Brady, so if he now Antonio Brown's out, Gronkowski might be out. So he's a little bit limited, but Brady just keeps on keeping on. However, he'll be 73 and he'll be out there throwing.
They need to turn it around. This is a big game for them because they've come out looking a little sloppy the past few weeks, and really maybe 3 out of the last 4 weeks. I guess that Patriots was quite some time ago. That was a little further back than I expected, but you lost to Washington, you lost to the Saints, you won against the shit Bears, you won by a score over the Eagles, dominated the Dolphins, barely beat the Patriots due to a missed field goal at the end of that game. So this is the time that last year the Buccaneers turned it on and never looked back. I think they won like the last 9 or 10 games of that season, including the playoffs, after a little bit of a rocky start. So they got to do it regardless of who's on the field, because you can't struggle against the Giants at home. But it should be an interesting one.
And then for Thanksgiving football, usually
Ooh.
you could just safely bet against the Lions because they just always lose. But maybe they'll finally win a game. They still haven't won a game yet this year. So maybe they'll finally have some happy turkey. And then we'll see with the Cowboys. And I forget which the night game is now. That's the third game that's on for NFL for Thursday.
Is Buffalo, New Orleans. It's always it's always like an actual game. Like they're supposed to put a decent game there. So
that could be a fun game. Now is Winston back yet?
He tore his ACL, I believe. So he's gone. He's done.
Well, that might be a good bounce back game for the Bills then.
Well, I do know they actually just Taysom Hill just got signed to a very strange contract extension. Schefter tweeted about it today. I still think Chase Daniel is going to be, or not Chase Daniel.
Trevor Siemian
is going to be the starting quarterback for them going forward. And honestly, he's looked pretty good. Not going to lie.
Yeah, I mean, if it'll be interesting how long they can keep him going. It took him a little while to get going against the Eagles. They still got crushed defensively, though they had a great run defense until they faced the Eagles. The Saints did. But I would just say, the Bills on a comeback off a blow-off loss on a Thanksgiving night game, that doesn't spell well for the Saints.
Yeah, and Kamara still may be out because he didn't play last week. That's a big deal for them if he doesn't play.
Oh, massive.
And this is that contract, which I think is very interesting because I don't know how effective Taysom Hill is as a quarterback, but New Orleans quarterback Taysom Hill signed a unique 4-year hybrid type of contract extension that could be worth anywhere between $40 million and $95 million, depending on the position he plays, and includes $22.5 million guaranteed. His hybrid deal is unique and unlike any other contracts because it pays him a $40 million base salary for the role he's currently playing and up to an additional $55 if he does become the Saints quarterback for the next 4 seasons. I
can't really see. I mean, he's never really developed into that second tier more than a gimmick quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that's. I remember when Sean Payton tried to tell us that Taysom Hill is going to be the next Steve Young. I remember that. That wasn't very long ago, and it still seems like he's rather attached to him. He's a great he's a great flex player that you can put at tight end, that you can put back there for 5 to 8 snaps a game and really throw a defense off. So I think he has value. I don't know about that. That seems like a little bit much for him.
Not $40 million, not $10 million a year worth of value.
Yeah. But I guess that is, if you plan just to keep doing the same thing, $10 million a year. It's not, you're not investing the entire boat in him, but seems like a lot for a guy who's only going to be a little bit of a gimmick in this whole offense. Sean Payton likes him and wants to keep him, so I guess that's why that happened. Another super chat we got from Dick's Enormous said, "Are you into MMA?" for $2. I like MMA. I would consider myself a little more than a casual for MMA. I typically watch not every pay-per-view, but most of the pay-per-views I'll try to give a watch. What about yourself, Robert?
Casual fan. Not a big fan, but casual fan.
Yeah. I mean, in Vegas, you have to at least be a little bit of a fan with all the stuff they got going on there. But I love the UFC and how Dana White runs the UFC. That's, if anything, with all of the woke nonsense, that's been a great thing for the UFC to really come out ahead of all that, not only to make sure they played, to make sure they actually are competing and putting on events and keeping people employed during all this COVID bullshit, but also as an example to all these other leagues that we're not just going to let one side speak. We're here. You guys have your voice. If we're going to let one side speak for BLM, for whatever social justice garbage you want, we're going to let the other side speak out. We're going to let somebody like Colby Covington walk out there with a MAGA hat and an American flag. And if that's what we're going to establish, you're going to let people put their views out there. That's the standard you need to have. Let everybody speak their piece.
Yeah, I mean, Dana White and Joe Rogan are the two best things they have going for them currently. I think they need another star. It can be a controversial star like Ronda Rousey or any of the others, but they need some form of because the Irishman's days, I think, are really numbered and past his prime. So they need somebody else to generate mass attention beyond the core fan base.
Yeah, Conor, I think Conor's lost like 3 of his last 4 fights or something like that. Obviously, he snapped his ankle or snapped his leg in the other fight, which that's disappointing. I would have liked to see that play out. He's going to be back, but you're right. He doesn't have that same draw that he had. And they had a time when him and Rousey were there, and it was crazy. So you're right. They do need a star that appeals to the masses. They have stars. I mean, Usman is elite. What him and Covington just had, the fight that they had, I think that Colby did better than a lot of people expected, but Usman just is really fucking good. So they have fantastic talent. But is that talent marketable to the masses is always the question. They got people like Justin Gaethje, who I think is really a fan favorite, just got off a really great fight in UFC 268 or whatever the most recent one was. He's somebody they're going to be pushing because he's someone that people really like to see fight. But is he really at that level where he should be getting some of these fights? That's always the question you ask when they push a lot of these popular guys. Either way, I do like MMA, and I think it's something we're going to be covering more on this channel in the future because it's only growing for good reason, because it's run by good people like Dana White. And I think we check Streamlabs, make sure we didn't get anything over there. All right, looks like we're good. Robert, once again, thanks for joining me for Monday Evening Quarterback. We always have a nice big crowd, especially when you show up. We got almost up to 400 people watching, which is great for these types of streams. What do you have to plug?
So, if you want free picks and predictions all year long, go to sportspicks.locals.com. I think we've had 12 winning weeks out of 14. This last weekend stunk. But otherwise, it's been fantastic. Great run. You would have almost doubled your money by this point. Already about midway through the NFL, 2/3 of the way through college football. We'll start having some NBA and college basketball picks down the road, March Madness, all of that. Probably some baseball, maybe some MMA thrown in overtime. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of information. And it's an easy way to make some money, as is proven again this year. So you can go to sportspicks.locals.com. For all of that free football picks and predictions all year long.
Absolutely. Robert's always got the pitch down pat. Doesn't matter if it's for Viva Barnes Law or for Sports Picks, but Sports Picks is in the description of this video, so make sure you guys check that out. Go become a member, and if you want to, go become a supporter for all of that extra insight. As far as Sports Wars goes, keep keep tuned. We've got Johnny Arnett with his first video, which is a great, fantastic video on what made 90s NBA special. That's going to be coming out very soon. But other than that, we're just going to keep calling it as we see it when it comes to woke sports, LeBron James, all these people that continue to speak out about things that they should keep their mouths shut on. But thank you, Robert, for joining me. Always a pleasure, my friend. Chat, thank you guys so much. We will be here next week, and we will talk to you later. Peace.